In September 1922, one of the greatest humanitarian catastrophes in the history of the modern world took place on the Aegean coast of Turkey. A city burned, a civilization ended, and the nations with the power to stop it chose, deliberately and in writing, not to intervene. What happened at Smyrna in those 9 days is not a disputed footnote. It is documented by hundreds of eyewitnesses, American naval officers, British journalists, French diplomats, relief workers, survivors, and the sailors aboard the Allied warships anchored less than a mile from the waterfront, who watched through binoculars as 300,000 people burned and drowned and died within sight of ships that could have saved them. It is one of the most documented atrocities of the 20th century. It is also one of the least known outside of Greece. The man who broke ranks, who defied the orders of the United States Navy, the instructions of his own government, and every calculation of personal safety, was not a soldier. He was not a diplomat. He was not a man whose name anyone in Washington or London or Athens would have recognized. He was a 41-year-old YMCA volunteer from Utica, New York, with Pott's disease of the spine and no official authority over anything. His name was Asa Jennings. And in the second week of September 1922, he did something that the combined naval forces of Britain, France, Italy, and the United States refused to do. He saved them. To understand what Asa Jennings walked into, you need to understand what Smyrna was before September 1922. Smyrna sits on the Aegean coast of Asia Minor, modern-day Izmir in western Turkey. It is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Greeks had lived there for 3,000 years, not as colonizers, not as occupiers, as the original inhabitants of a coastline that had been Greek since the age of Homer, since the time when the Aegean world was the center of human civilization and Smyrna was one of its brightest points. By 1922, Smyrna is a city of 300,000 people. It is cosmopolitan in a way that few cities anywhere in the world can claim. Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Levantines, Turks, communities that have lived alongside each other for generations, that share markets and neighborhoods and the waterfront promenade that runs along the harbor for miles. The city has electric trams. It has opera houses. It has consulates from every major power. It has a thriving port that handles goods from 3 continents. European travelers who visit in the early 20th century consistently describe it as one of the most beautiful and civilized cities on the Mediterranean. The Greeks call it the Pearl of the Ionian Sea. In the summer of 1922, a war is ending badly. 3 years earlier, in May 1919, Greek forces had landed at Smyrna with the blessing of Britain, France, and the United States, who had promised Greece a zone of administration in Western Anatolia as reward for its participation on the Allied side in the First World War. The Greek Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos had negotiated brilliantly at the Paris Peace Conference. Greece had been promised territories that would nearly double the size of the country and fulfill the Megali idea, the great dream of uniting all Greek populations of the Eastern Mediterranean under one state. The landing at Smyrna begins that dream. It ends in catastrophe. What the Allied powers who authorized the Greek landing did not account for, or chose not to account for, was Mustafa Kemal, a Turkish general who had distinguished himself at Gallipoli, who had watched the Ottoman Empire dismembered at the Paris Peace Conference, and who had decided that the terms imposed on Turkey by the Allies were not terms he intended to accept. Kemal builds a nationalist movement from nothing in the Anatolian interior. He organizes an army. He finds weapons. he finds men. And through 1920 and 1921, while Greece is distracted by a political crisis that puts the pro-German King Constantine back on the throne and loses Greece its allied support, Kemal's army grows stronger and more organized and more dangerous. In August 1922, Kemal launches his final offensive. The Greek army, stretched too thin, undersupplied, its best commanders sidelined by the political turmoil in Athens, collapses with stunning speed. Units that had held the Anatolian interior for 3 years disintegrate in days. The retreat becomes a rout. Greek soldiers stream toward the coast, toward Smyrna, toward the sea. Behind them, Kemal's forces advance. On September 9th, 1922, Turkish cavalry enters Smyrna. In the harbor, anchored less than a mile from the waterfront, sit the warships of 4 allied nations: British, American, French, Italian. Their guns are loaded. Their crews are at stations. They have the capacity individually to land armed parties and establish order in the city. Together, they represent a force that no irregular army in Anatolia could challenge. They have orders not to intervene. The orders come from the top. American naval policy in the region is shaped by Admiral Mark Bristol, the U.S. High Commissioner, who has spent years cultivating relationships with the Turkish nationalist government, and who has consistently downplayed or dismissed reports of atrocities against Greek and Armenian civilians throughout the war. Bristol's instructions to American naval commanders at Smyrna are explicit. American forces are not to take sides. American forces are not to intervene in what is characterized as an internal Turkish matter. American forces are to protect American property and American citizens only. The Greek and Armenian civilians of Smyrna are not American citizens. Into this situation, in early September 1922, arrives Asa Jennings. He is 41 years old. He stands 5 feet 3 inches tall. He has Pott's disease, tuberculosis of the spine, which has given him a double curvature and a distinctive stoop that makes him appear even smaller than he is. He has a wife and children. He has no military training, no diplomatic credentials, no authority over anything beyond the YMCA relief operations he has been running in the region. He arrived in Smyrna months earlier to help coordinate humanitarian relief for refugees already displaced by the fighting further inland. He is, by every conventional measure, nobody. He is about to become the most important person in Smyrna. September 9th, 1922. Turkish cavalry rides into Smyrna. For the first 4 days, an uneasy tension holds. The Turkish army establishes control over the city. There are incidents, looting, violence against Armenian civilians, the arrest of Greek and Armenian men of military age, but the city has not yet exploded. The Greek and Armenian populations, 300,000 strong, are frightened, but still in their homes, still hoping that the presence of the Allied warships in the harbor means that some protection is coming. Asa Jennings moves through the city in these 4 days, doing what he has been doing for months: organizing, distributing food, identifying the most vulnerable civilians, building lists. He is methodical in the way that men who know they cannot do everything focus intensely on what they can do. On the evening of September 13th, he smells smoke. The fire begins in the Armenian quarter. Multiple witnesses, including American, British, and French observers whose accounts are preserved in diplomatic archives, report seeing Turkish soldiers carrying petroleum cans into buildings before the fires start. A Smyrna fireman named Emmanuel Katsaros, working to contain an early blaze, confronts a Turkish soldier setting fire to a building and demands an explanation. The soldier's answer is recorded and preserved. He says, "You have your orders, and we have ours." Within hours, the fire is beyond anything the city's fire brigade, already depleted because its Greek members have been dismissed, can control. The wind off the Aegean catches it. It spreads from the Armenian quarter into the Greek quarter. It moves with the speed and direction that people who study fires recognize as deliberate, burning the Christian quarters systematically while stopping precisely at the edge of the Turkish and Jewish quarters. The city of Smyrna is burning. The Turkish and Jewish quarters are untouched. The people of the Greek and Armenian quarters run toward the waterfront. It is the only direction that is not on fire. They carry what they can: children, old people, whatever fit in their arms when they fled. They packed onto the waterfront promenade, the beautiful boulevard that runs along the harbor, until there is no room left, and people are standing in the water to escape the heat of the fire behind them. 300,000 people on a strip of waterfront less than a mile from the Allied warships. The fire burns behind them. The sea is in front of them. And in the harbor, the warships sit. Asa Jennings is on the waterfront when the full scale of what is happening becomes clear to him. He has found refuge with his family in an Italian building near the waterfront that the fire has not yet reached. He looks out at the crowd on the quay. He looks at the ships in the harbor. He understands the calculation that every Allied commander in that harbor has already made, that the orders are not to intervene, that the political consequences of intervention outweigh the humanitarian imperative, that 300,000 Greek and Armenian civilians are not, in the formal language of naval orders, their problem. Jennings makes a different calculation. He begins moving through the crowd on the waterfront. He is looking for boats, any boats. He finds a few small craft, enough to begin ferrying the most desperate cases, the injured, the children, the elderly, to the Allied ships in the harbor. The ships accept these small boatloads of refugees. They are, after all, not being asked to intervene. They are simply receiving people who have reached them. But small boats ferrying dozens of people at a time will not save 300,000. Jennings knows this. He needs ships, real ships, cargo ships, transport ships, anything with the capacity to move thousands of people at once. He looks at the harbor and he sees them. Greek merchant ships, vessels that have been sitting in Smyrna harbor, their Greek crews watching the catastrophe unfold on the waterfront, unable to act without authorization from the Greek government. Jennings goes to find the senior American naval officer in Smyrna. He explains what he needs. He needs someone with authority to contact the Greek government and request that those ships be made available for an evacuation. The naval officer explains what Jennings already knows, that American naval policy prohibits intervention, that the orders are clear, that there is nothing he can do. Jennings does not accept this answer. What happens next is one of the most audacious acts of individual initiative in the history of humanitarian operations. Jennings, a YMCA volunteer with no rank, no authority, and no official standing, sends an open telegram, not a coded diplomatic message, an open telegram to the Greek Prime Minister, deliberately unencrypted so that anyone could read it, stating in plain language that if Greece does not send ships immediately, he will broadcast to the entire world that the Greek government is abandoning its own people to be slaughtered on the waterfront of Smyrna. It is not a request. It is not a negotiation. It is a calculated act of political blackmail by a man who understands that shame is the only weapon he has. The Greek government moves, but the Greek merchant fleet will not sail into Smyrna harbor without guarantees of safe passage. The ship's captains need authorization from an allied officer, someone with actual military rank, to guarantee their protection. Jennings has no military rank, but he implies, without explicitly stating, that American naval authority stands behind the evacuation operation he is proposing. He uses the weight of American power he does not actually possess, to move Greek ships that will not move without it. The Greek ships move. Meanwhile, the Turkish military has imposed a deadline: 7 days. In 7 days, all remaining Greek and Armenian civilians must be gone from Smyrna. The men of military age will be deported to the interior. What deportation to the interior has meant throughout Anatolia, what it has meant for years, documented in report after report that the Allied governments have received and filed and ignored, is death. Not eventually, not metaphorically, death on the roads, in the labor battalions, in the mountains of central Turkey, far from any witness. 7 days, Patriarch Chrysostomos, the Greek Orthodox Bishop of Smyrna and one of the most senior figures in the entire Greek Church, does not make it to the ships. He is summoned by the Turkish commander Nuruddin Pasha, who then delivers him to a mob waiting outside. American consul George Horton, who witnesses the aftermath, records what happens. The patriarch is torn apart in the streets. The soldiers present do not intervene. One of the most senior figures in Christendom is killed in broad daylight within sight of the Allied warships, and not a single armed intervention is made to stop it. On September 18th, 5 days after the fire began, the first Greek transport ships enter Smyrna harbor. Jennings stands on the quay and begins organizing the boarding. He has no staff, no trained personnel, no military police to manage the crowd. What he has is the absolute focus of a man who has decided that the only thing that matters right now is getting as many people as possible onto those ships before the 7-day deadline expires. The loading begins. The crowd surges toward the ships. People who have been standing in the heat and the smoke for 5 days, without food, without water, watching the city they were born in burn to ash behind them, pressing toward the first real hope of escape they have seen. Jennings works the quay for hours without stopping. He directs the loading. He manages the crowd. He coordinates with the ship captains. He sends the loaded ships out and waits for the next ones to come in. He works through the night. He works the next day. He does not sleep. The ships go and come back. Go and come back. Each run carries thousands of people to the Greek islands, to Athens, to anywhere that is not Smyrna. Jennings keeps account. The numbers grow. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. By the time the initial 11-day evacuation is complete, American Relief Committee records and Greek government accounts indicate that approximately 350,000 people have been taken off the waterfront of Smyrna. Jennings does not stop there. In the months that follow, working the same combination of audacity and improvisation that drove the initial evacuation, he continues coordinating refugee removals across the region. By the time his work is done, the total number of people saved through his efforts reaches an estimated 1.25 million. 1.25 million people, a YMCA volunteer from Utica, New York, with Pott's disease and no official authority over anything. Most people will never hear this story. They'll go their whole lives not knowing what happened here. If that bothers you, if you think the silence around these moments is wrong, subscribe to this channel. We're filling that silence one video at a time. And if this story deserved to be told, hit that like button. That's how the next person finds it. The fire burned for 9 days. When it was finally extinguished on September 22, 1922, the Greek, Armenian, and Levantine quarters of Smyrna, the neighborhoods that had housed the Christian population of the city for 3,000 years, were ash and rubble. The Turkish and Jewish quarters were intact. The death toll is disputed in the way that death tolls from politically sensitive atrocities are always disputed. Estimates range from 10,000 to 125,000 Greeks and Armenians killed by fire, by drowning, by violence during the days of chaos that preceded and accompanied the burning. The precise number will never be known because there was no one with authority and inclination to count. What followed the burning of Smyrna was formalized at the Treaty of Lausanne in July 1923. Greece and Turkey agreed to the largest compulsory population exchange in history. 1.5 million Greeks living in Turkey, most of them families who had been in Asia Minor for generations, who spoke Turkish as their first language, who had never set foot in the Greek state, were expelled and resettled in Greece. 500,000 Muslims living in Greece were expelled and resettled in Turkey. 3,000 years of Greek civilization in Asia Minor, the world of Homer, of the early Christian church, of Byzantine culture, of some of the most ancient Greek communities on earth, ended, not gradually, not through assimilation or migration. In 30 days, the international reaction was muted in the way that international reactions to atrocities against populations without powerful advocates are always muted. Winston Churchill, who bore significant responsibility for the political decisions that led to the Greek landing at Smyrna in 1919, wrote in his memoirs that Kemal's army celebrated their triumph by burning Smyrna to ashes and by a vast massacre of its Christian population. American observers on the ground filed reports that their superiors in Washington suppressed or minimized. Admiral Bristol, the U.S. High Commissioner, who had issued the non-intervention orders, worked actively to manage the narrative coming out of Smyrna, pressuring journalists and relief workers to soften their accounts. American Consul George Horton, who was present throughout the catastrophe and whose account is one of the most detailed and damning records of what happened, wrote that the Smyrna affair far outweighed the horrors of the First World War and had been somehow soft-pedaled and almost expunged from the memory of present-day man. He wrote that the peculiar horror clinging to the catastrophe was due not only to the savagery of what was done, but to the passive acquiescence of the great powers who had the means to stop it and chose not to. He was right on both counts. Asa Jennings returned to the United States after the evacuation. He was received quietly, without official ceremony, without public recognition from the government, whose authority he had borrowed without permission to save over 1 million lives. The American government was not eager to draw attention to what had happened at Smyrna, or to the man who had exposed, by his individual actions, the gap between what American power could have done and what American policy chose to do. He gave speeches, he wrote, he tried to tell the story of what he had seen and what he had done. He was not famous. He did not become famous. His name does not appear in most histories of the period. In the comprehensive accounts of the Greco-Turkish War, in the diplomatic histories of the Near East, in the biographies of the men who shaped the region's future, Asa Jennings, from Utica, New York, is a footnote at best. In Greece, he is something different. The Greek government awarded him the highest honor it could bestow on a foreign civilian. In the Greek communities of the diaspora, the communities built by the refugees he saved, the families who settled in Athens and Thessaloniki and New York and Melbourne, carrying nothing but what they could hold in their arms when they ran. His name is remembered with a reverence that official history has never given him. The refugees he saved built new lives. They carried with them the culture, the language, the memory of the world they had lost. The Asia Minor Greeks, who poured into the Greek state in 1922 and 1923, transformed it economically, culturally, demographically. They brought skills and industries and traditions that reshaped modern Greece in ways that are still visible today. Thessaloniki, which received hundreds of thousands of Asia Minor refugees, became the city it is today, partly because of what those families built there. 3,000 years of civilization does not disappear when it is expelled from its homeland. It travels, it adapts, it survives in the food and the music and the words and the memory of the people who carry it forward. The city of Smyrna became Izmir. The Greek quarter was rebuilt as a Turkish city. The harbor where the Allied warships sat at anchor during the 9 days of the fire is today a modern waterfront. The promenade where 300,000 people stood between fire and sea is a park. There is very little in Izmir today that marks what stood there before September 1922. The erasure was deliberate and thorough and largely successful in the physical sense. But the people who left carried what could not be burned. Every Greek family with roots in Asia Minor, in Smyrna, in Pontus, in Cappadocia, in the thousands of villages and towns along the Aegean coast, carries the memory of a world that was destroyed in 9 days. The grandmothers who described houses they would never see again. The grandfathers who never talked about what they had witnessed and whose silence said everything. The families who kept the keys to homes in Smyrna for generations, keeping them not because they expected to go back, but because throwing them away felt like accepting that it was really gone. It was really gone. What Asa Jennings understood on the waterfront of Smyrna, what made him act when every official around him had found reasons not to, was something simple and devastating. He understood that the people standing between the fire and the sea were not statistics. They were not a diplomatic problem. They were not a political complication for the governments of Britain and America and France to manage from a careful distance. They were people, with names, with children, with houses that were burning behind them. He could not save all of them, the ones who were deported to the interior, the ones who died on the quay before the ships arrived, the ones who drowned trying to reach the Allied warships that would not come to them. He could not save all of them. He saved over 1 million, with no rank, no authority, no orders, no support from the governments whose power he invoked without permission. A blackmail telegram he sent in the open because he had nothing else to use, and the absolute refusal to stand on a waterfront and watch people die when there were ships in the harbor. If you felt the weight of this story, that's history doing what it's supposed to do. That like button honors that feeling. Don't skip it. We carry these stories carefully, every fact verified, every name checked, every detail earned. If that standard matters to you, subscribe and help us maintain it. Where are you watching from? If this story connects to your family, if your grandparents or great-grandparents were among the people on that waterfront or among the refugees who rebuilt their lives in Greece, tell us in the comments. These stories belong to the families who lived them. We read everything. Thank you for carrying the weight of Asa Jennings' story forward and the weight of the more than 1 million people he refused to leave behind. He bore something heavier than any of us will ever be asked to carry. The least we can do is remember it.